Welcome to the Emergency Mind Podcast. I'm Dan Dworkis, and this is a space where we train ourselves to think and perform better during times of crisis. ER doctors or not, we all face emergencies in our lives, and this podcast is all about getting better at acting during times of uncertainty and stress and learning how to apply knowledge under pressure. So listen up, train hard, and enjoy, because you never know what's coming your way next. To learn more about building your emergency mind and to dig deeper into many of the concepts we get into in this podcast series, head over to our website at emergencymind.com. My guest this episode is Bret Whitman. Bret is an experienced waterman with expertise in multiple disciplines, including freediving, big wave surfing, and spearfishing. Bret is a seriously deep thinker, and we get into some awesome material in this episode about how to structure your training to prepare yourself to make serious decisions under the pressure of facing down a 40-foot wave or being 60 to 80 feet under the ocean with no oxygen tank. But don't worry, even if you're completely landlocked, there's some great material in here for you. You can connect with Bret online at his website, spearfactor.com. That's SPEARFACTOR.com, or on Instagram at _spearfactor. As always on this podcast, our mission is to dive into applying knowledge under pressure, not to provide specific medical advice. Additionally, our opinions are our own and not those of our respective employers. All that said, let's get to the episode. I hope you enjoy. Here we are, Bret. I'm so happy to be sitting here talking with you about this, man. Welcome to the podcast, and just really jazzed to be here digging in with you.
Oh yeah, I'm excited to be here. I'm very humbled you have me. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. So Bret, you and I met when we were on this pretty epic spearfishing trip down in Baja, and I think it's a good as any place to start as we're digging into this. And you are obviously an expert and a long time, well, I see that face you're making. You might disagree with me on that, but to me, you're certainly an expert both in spearfishing and in freediving in general. And on this trip, it was my first time going out. I was an abject beginner. And for people that have never gone spearfishing before, never been freediving before, it's a really wonderful, excellent taste both of nature and the universe, and also of, in some senses, stress and pressure and figuring out how to handle yourself in those environments. And you were super instrumental in getting me out there, getting me underwater, and getting me to the fish and into wonderful situations. So first off, thank you for that. That was totally excellent.
My pleasure.
And that's what sort of started us both on this idea of talking about, well, what is the overlap between functioning under stress and pressure, freediving, spearfishing, and I'm hoping we can also jump today into some of your other awesome hobbies, big wave surfing and jiu-jitsu.
I've always been into trying to be the best version of myself I could be, and that has kind of led me into when I was younger, it was work out, be physical, and the physical aspect of it. But then as I got older, and as your physical component kind of digresses, I feel like mentally, my mental component had hardly been touched. And maybe it's emotional maturity, whatever it is, whatever you want to call it. I kind of found that challenge through freediving, spearfishing, and jiu-jitsu, and then obviously in my early 20s with the surfing, trying to be a big wave surfer, and just really enjoyed that stuff. And I think when you start doing those things and then you start to look around you, there's not many of you that are kind of like that, but then you end up gravitating towards others that are like that. And it's I don't know, it kind of brings everybody closer together, and it's nice to find people with like-minded kind of a mindset. I always talk about in my thing, mindset. Mindset is everything.
So take us back in time a little bit to who you were when you first started doing, especially, and just to pick one of these sort of long list of things, let's jump into freediving somewhat arbitrarily. So when you first started doing freediving, and maybe take just a second and explain what that is to people that don't know, but when you first started doing freediving, were you really just concentrating only on the physical aspects of it, or were you introduced to sort of the mental side of it at the same time?
Honestly, it was just the physical aspect because I got into really trying to um, free dive because I wanted to increase my breath hold for surfing,
Hmm.
big waves, and I wanted to be mentally prepared, knowing like, oh, I can hold my breath for 3 minutes, I'll be fine if a wave were to hit me, and that would give me peace of mind um,
Hmm.
in those circumstances. But I didn't have any formal training at that point, and it was like I sitting there what we call a static breath hold. Just doing a static breath hold, sitting there and holding your breath without moving is one thing, and then when you go do like dynamic and you're diving down and you're moving and you're consuming oxygen. I didn't have any um, training as far as how to optimize my performance doing that. I took my past performance and my mindset of like go, 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 go to an intensity like weightlifting for football and college or boxing, where it's like um, more about kind of grunting through things and, pound your head so hard into the wall, you make your own door rather than maybe just step aside and go through the door kind of
Hmm.
mindset sometimes. Well, when you get into free diving, that's really dangerous to kind of have that mindset because you can get hurt where you're like, I want to go to 100 a day. Well, that just might not be in the cards. Physiology, like why it's like you could be something could be going on. I don't know, whatever you're in your diet, whatever it is, could stop you from diving down to whatever target goal you want to try to hit that day. So where I was like, I'm just going to try harder. And when you try harder, you're using more oxygen. It's totally counterproductive. And as I progressed, I kind of learned more too about, oh, when I'm relaxed and when I feel like really calm, and I felt great. And that was a really long dive. Huh, interesting. And I learned that really to perform at your maximum, you have to let go
Hmm.
of a lot of stuff. Like it is the most polar opposite thing for me, where no, you have to almost not care that you're going to try to go for your max dive today. You're going to try to hit 100 feet today. And it's almost like my best depths, which are nothing impressive for sure. But my best depths are like the days that it's like accident where I didn't even know,
Hmm.
look down at my watch and I was like, oh wow, I'm at, you know, 80 feet, 90 feet, and I feel fine. Oh, but then it's funny, you look at your watch and then you're like, oh, I better go. I'm not supposed to be here, And then that's where that there's a lot of self-talk that goes on when you're diving.
Hmm.
But really, it's about letting go and trusting in yourself and just I don't know. It's totally opposite than playing football or anything like competitive where you just have to um, give it up, just give everything up emotionally, give it up, and just focus on relaxing and go into like almost a sleep state, and just feel. I mean, it's very Zen-like, It's very
Yeah.
Zen, especially when you're breathing. You focus on your breathing.
Wow. Okay. There's so many cool things in what you just dug into there, and I want to
That's pretty
press
long.
a couple pieces.
Uh,
The no, no, no. One of the first things that you said was that you got into free diving because initially you wanted to be able to hold your breath longer if a big wave were to sort of break in a direction you didn't want it to. And there's some just really right off the bat huge connections between that and things that we do in the emergency world all the time, right? So you're looking at a skill you
right,
want to perform, and you sort of visualize yourself going forward, and you do this thing that the Stoic philosophers would call PreMeditato Malorum, the idea that you see the bad things that are going to happen, and you accept that.
right.
You don't try to pretend that you're never going to get knocked under a wave and pinned. Instead, you see it happening and you say, okay, well, what does it take for me to change the way that I can behave with that? If there's
Right.
pressure, if there's bad things coming, how do I train that specific thing that's going to be hard? And so that's what a super cool way to get into free diving as a way to address the reality of the situation that you're facing. Um, were you sort of conscious of that at the time, or is that more like retrospectively you can look back and say, okay, these things were linked up for me?
Yeah, you know what? It kind of honestly, it was like the military training. It was like prepare for the worst, hope for the best.
Hmm.
And it goes back to that whole thing of like, even in wrestling and all the things that I did, where you literally, beat the shit out of yourself so that everything else is easy, you
Hmm.
know? Just it's just that simple
Yeah.
principle of like, okay, even in high school, I wanted to be able to bench press 300 pounds. Why? Because I assumed the biggest guy I was going to be going against weighed 300 pounds. So if I at least I could bench press 300 pounds, I could press him off me and extend. And the same, with like wrestling, you're going to be going live for 6 minutes. I need to be able to go 100% for 6 minutes, so I'm going to train to 8 minutes, so that if something were to happen in that 6 minutes, that whatever, I'm more than capable of dealing with it.
Hmm.
And I think what it is with the big wave surfing is that, in football, wrestling, or whatever the stuff, whatever you're into, any athlete, I think kind of understands that. But with the big wave surfing is that if you could drown, you could die. Um, and a large portion of that the way to stop that from happening is having a mental mindset to know everything you have done, you are more than prepared for it. And that's because you're underwater, right? Everybody knows you can sit there and hold your breath when you're calm. But when you freak out, you're done. Like you're
Hmm.
done pretty quick. So the object is to get you in such a solid mindset state where um, anything that were to happen that would be bad, I know I am so good, uh, that I am more than prepared. It's like fighting Muhammad Ali and then going down to elementary school and being like, I know the biggest, baddest bully comes from me. I'm gonna be fine. I mean, that's as simple as you can put it. So
No.
like we overtrain, just like yeah. In my dad's shooting school, we go there and train, 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 and they say that there's the law of like 50%, right? Like if you do it live, you better shoot for 100% because when you do it live, if you were to have to do it live and get in a shootout, so to speak, the odds are there's going to be a 50% air ratio. It's going to be, yeah, you're not going to be able to put hits on the target the way that you are when it's not live, when no one's shooting at you or it's
Sure.
not a person. So you
Sure.
want to train to a higher standard.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's part of the reason that we created the whole emergency mind project in general is the idea that the knowledge that you understand when it's calm and easy, you have to be able to apply that knowledge in real life situations under pressure and in stress. In the emergency world, we say like you got to get that knowledge into the patient where and when they need it. And the knowledge sitting on a shelf in a book, which I'm sort of inferring is similar to your idea of like a static breath hold, is very different than knowledge delivered to a patient under pressure with blood, guts, and screaming. More of sort of like the dynamic version of
Right.
like how do you hold your breath when a wave is pinning you down. So I very much agree with you about that translating those skills is a skill in and of itself.
Right. So it's interesting you say that because I was talking to a friend the other day, and it's like I could write a book and tell you how to hunt certain fish, but you're never gonna, as far it's not going to supplement any time you spend in the water and actually go and hunt the fish. I mean, I could write it out for you, tell you exactly what to do, and it will
Hmm.
definitely help you. It will give you the tools. But if you don't know how to apply those tools in a real life situation, um, there's always going to be like, right, there's always going to be that time where you have to kind of adjust and figure out, oh, that's what he means with this.
Hmm.
That's what he means with this. Okay, and I see this now. That's what he was talking about. Now at this point, I need to do this. Like if I were, you know what I mean? Like, so you're going to be referencing the book of instruction on, spearfishing this type of fish at this point and this point. But until you do it, it's, it, it's something all together. It's different. It's different altogether.
And so how do you translate that idea of taking a concept and putting it into play for like a real either fishing environment or surfing environment or even a jiu-jitsu match or whatever? How do you do that in situations where it's really challenging to overtrain the exact skill set? Right? So you can train your breath holding, you can train components. And so let me take a step back. So something we talk about again in the emergency world is the idea of macro skills versus micro skills, right? So if I'm putting a central line into the patient's neck, right, the macro skill is getting the line in. The micro skill might be the understanding the angle of the placement of the needle. And then a second micro skill might be, okay, once you've placed it, how do you move to the next step and get the wire in the right place, right? So you can break these macro skills down into micro skills. Some of them you can train easily. Some of them are a lot harder to train. So when you get into a situation where, like you're thinking about big wave surfing, okay, so the macro skill would be catching the wave and getting in the right position. And the micro skill would be, okay, holding your breath if you get smashed. And I'm clearly not a big wave surfer. I'm probably saying that wrong, but you get the idea, right? So when you find yourself in situations where the situation itself is either so rare, so hard or expensive to come by, or so dangerous that you can't overtrain that exact situation, how do you apply that concept to that idea, right? And maybe the analogy here is you're trying to go for, a fish that is so rare that you maybe only get one shot at it your entire life, or it's a really difficult situation.
So that's interesting because, oftentimes we learn through failure, right? And in some situations, you don't really have a choice. If you fail, someone dies in your situation, or,
hopefully not. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, for me, I mean, obviously I do try to break everything down. When I was big wave surfing, it was like, do 100 up downs a day. Why? Because I want to be able to stand up quickly as possible, even when I'm fatigued from paddling for this wave, because they're moving very fast. So I want to be able to stand up, know that my stand up, I'm not going to stand up slow and lazy and fall because I'm just merely out of shape. So you try to get in shape as much as possible. But the one thing I remember that I was not prepared for, you can't really, you can't really, like, I guess, train for it, but you know about it, but you can't really train for it, is the wind coming up the face of a big wave. It's accelerated, obviously, because, as wind goes across a flat surface, now there's a bump and it's accelerating over that bump. It's maintaining that speed, but it's going faster up the wave. Now you do that on a 30-foot wave or a 40-foot wave, and it's racing up. And then you combine that with, you're basically have a wing, your surfboard is sticking out of the wave, and the wind is trying to blow you up and hold you up at the top of the wave, which is like the absolute worst thing, right, that can happen, because if it holds you at the top of the wave too long and the wave breaks, you go what they, over the falls, they call, you go right over with the full force of the wave landing on you, and you're falling 30, 35 feet flat on the ground, but on the surface of the wave, on the bottom, get the wind knocked out of you, and then you just get rolled over. So the wind thing was that I was used to it for, small waves and all that, but I was not prepared for it the first time I paddled out. But one thing you can do to prepare for things like that is to strengthen your skills at everything else, so that in the moment when you're having to deal with the wind, so to speak, or whatever X factor that happens, you're pretty much can do everything else blindfolded, so that it's muscle memory, and you can either acknowledge the issue that's happening, or just ignore it and keep going on with what you do, because you've done it so many times. It's muscle memory. Like, I would think, like, if a patient was flipping out, right, and you're trying to do something, but you've done it a million times, the fact that you're able to tune out this person flipping out or blood squirting you in the face, and you're able to zone out, I don't know. I mean, like, I assume I've seen some things. I mean, the closest I've ever dealt with it is like childbirth, but but like, what I'm saying is like, it's like you have to be able to be so strong in those fundamental skills
Sure.
that you're able to cope with the little hiccups that happen. Like I remember I was paddling in, I'm like, whoa, the wind's really, really strong. I just paddle harder. I'll paddle harder. And because I was in shape, I was and did 100 up downs a day or whatever it was at the time, I was able to, number one, stand up quick, paddle hard, well, able to paddle harder to get into the wave to where the wind really wasn't a factor because I was still able to catch the wave because I was paddling so strong.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I stand up, I just take those skills that I learned that I applied on smaller waves. Say maybe for you it was like in a controlled environment,
Mm-hmm.
and I just go, oh, okay, I probably should put a little bit more weight on the front of my board here because the wind is pushing extra hard. So it's like all those little things that I've learned through surfing small waves, little things, I had to learn to tweak them on a larger scale when I was dealing with the wind and whatnot. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no,
So
that makes sense. So the idea is that you take, where you take your macro skill, whatever you're trying to learn, you break it down, whatever the micro skills are that you can isolate, you train, and then you overtrain those. You train to be good no matter what happens. And then even if you
right.
can't necessarily hit every single thing, you've created a package which together allows you to deploy the skill under pressure.
Yeah, maybe it's like, I guess the easiest way to sum it up would be like learning like calculus, right? You have such a strong fundamental base in mathematics that you're able to build upon that. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? Like, I guess we say in the military, like the guys go to these schools and, they pass these schools, right? Like dive school or whatever. And all that does is that allows you to continue to train to actually learn what it is you're going to be doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's like you graduate med school, you know, all that does is allow you now the opportunity to practice medicine,
Right.
you know? It's
For
not
sure.
like you graduate and you're like, I'm good, I'm done, right? That would be a scary, scary doctor, you know? You know what I'm
Very,
saying?
very true. Very true. And
Yeah.
that also reminds me of, something I think one of my first martial arts teachers told me, which is that, black belt reaching that sort of stage is never the end of anything. It just means that you've sort of started to figure out how to learn for yourself. And that's when your understanding, your ability to really dig into yourself really starts.
Yeah, I don't think, and that kind of leads me to my main point, I guess. The one thing I can say that I've learned, and this applies for anybody, any profession, anywhere, is that if you stay humble,
Mm.
you can continue to learn. The minute you get arrogant, um, or you just think you know everything, the learning stops, and you can learn from everybody. You can learn from a guy. You can learn from a guy that's just like I learned from Vlad, our friend Vlad.
Hmm.
And he asked me about something, and I kind of just thought about it. And I never thought about it because I just did it until I explained to him. I was like, you know what? That's a really good question. Because he was asking me about big wave surfing, and I was like, you know what I think it is? It's not that catching a wave and dropping into a wave, which means you're going down the wave face, you caught the wave. That's not hard, right? That's a basic. Those are. I'm not gonna say it. That's not like an advanced skill, right?
Hmm.
That's a basic skill. So how is that any different when you're doing it on a 30-foot wave? It's still a basic skill. But what it is it's confidence.
Hmm.
Like, and he asked me that question. He's like, well, what helps, And I was like, I'm not even that great of a surfer. But one thing I can tell you is like my mindset, you know, I, it's confidence. And there's a fine line between confidence and, arrogance.
Sure.
But I'm confident. And if I wasn't confident, I have no business being out there. So you have to be confident that you've done everything you can to prepare for something physically, and then actually confident in the skill or the craft that what you're going to be doing, so that when those variables kick in, you've got it.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think one step slightly back from that idea that, so you're saying preparation breeds confidence, and that
Right.
100% true, right? I also think that implicit in that is sort of an understanding that that no one else is coming to save you, right? It's up to you. Like if you want to do this thing, whether that thing is a jiu-jitsu match or free diving or whatever, like if you want to do it and you want to be good at it, the responsibility to figure out the steps and to train them and to do that, that's on you. That weight's on you. And that's
100%.
something that you have to not only understand, but really really love that idea that like, okay, I'm taking this weight. This is on me.
Right. Yeah, and I don't know if it's a pride thing. To me, it's not a pride thing, but I would never ever rely on anybody. I try not to train with that mindset of relying on anybody to come rescue you. That's, to me, it's kind of foolish, because that allows me to overtrain, I guess. Because if you thought if you were waiting, obviously when we free dive, we were very strict with the safety and we do the buddy system, especially when we start pushing deeper dives. And like we are like on it when we start going deeper. But part of that is I'm going to train and do everything right so that my friend doesn't have to come save me, right? Otherwise, you're like, oh, I'm just going to go and, I got so-and-so watching me. What could possibly go wrong? And that same mindset with, surfing, all the lifeguards are here. They'll rescue me. And the reality of the situation is like, yeah, by the time a lifeguard gets to you, if you get in real trouble, you're going to drown, unless. So I actually rescued, this is kind of funny. I was with John a couple of weeks ago, our friend John, and it was a pretty big day surfing, for here, coastal. I was like, to be honest, I really wasn't planning on it to be that big. There was a lot of water moving. It was a long period swell, so there was a lot of energy in that swell. And went out and surfed, and it was okay. Like, we had a fun time getting out through the waves. Like, we got pounded and tired, whatever. Surfed. On the way in, I'm riding this wave in, and there's a guy, and he doesn't have a surfboard, and he's yelling to me, get a lifeguard. And I was like, what's up? He looked like he was okay. I was like, what? And I couldn't understand because I'm like bellying a wave, and he's like, get a lifeguard. He like points to this guy who's on like a foam board, and he's clearly like a rental board, and he's a bigger guy, and he's paddling, and he's got his wetsuit like half down over his shoulder. And he looks like he just is like, oh my God. Well, what happened is we were surfing along the jetty and there was an eddy going out. So he was stuck in this eddy and he didn't know what was going on. He was just getting, dragged out. You can't fight.
Sure.
Yeah, there's a whole lesson in that too. You really can't fight water. You can't paddle upstream.
Right.
But you can redirect yourself, use that energy, right? Like it's like a keto or something. Use that energy and like
everything in jiu-jitsu as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And so I came up to him and I looked at him and he was all, he was panicked. He was freaking out. So I guess what happened was I go, okay, look, we're like right here, like I'm here. Nothing's going to happen to us. What the worst things that happen to us? We get washed out to sea, which, you know what? Sorry, isn't that bad? I got a plan. We'll just paddle in worst case scenario at the bay there because the bay is, wide open. We were right next to the jetty, and on the other side of the jetty was the entrance to San Diego or Mission Bay. So he was like, he just didn't have any idea what to do. So he's just holding on this board for dear life, breathing hard. And I'm like, okay, first thing we got to do is get this wetsuit back zipped up. So I zipped up his wetsuit. I'm like, all right, so this is the plan. This is what we're going to do, okay? And I try to explain it to him, and I'm like, you're going to be fine now, okay? It's okay. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. You're fine. He's like, okay. He really couldn't say much. And to be honest, I was pretty winded too. But I was just telling him, you're going to be all right. And there was a lot of water movement. So I was trying to like get him into the waves. And long story short, we got him into the beach. Another friend showed up and he was like kind of coaching him through it too. And I got him into the beach and I asked him, it's like, so what's going on, man? Why were you out here? Like, this is not a beginner day. And I wasn't mad at him. He's like, sure. I'm from Austin. I've just rented the surfboard and they told me to come out at Ocean Beach. And I was like, they didn't tell you that it was like 10-foot surf today and, a lot of energy in the water. And he's like, well, I'm only here for 4 days, so I really want to try to surf. And he was like, yeah, I was on the swim team. in high school.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, it's totally different, man. And he was like, and he kept, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm like, it's okay. And I was actually mad. I was like super mad at the people that rented the board in, tell him to go out because this poor guy didn't have a chance.
Mm.
But the point of the story is like the kid was yelling. One of the kids was like, get a lifeguard. I was like, dude, like you can't rely on what, if not me, like we had a saying, it's funny, at Army football when I played football though. It was like, if not me, then who, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I kind of live like that.
Yeah,
Like
man.
I have to be ready for everything
Hmm.
because when my boat was sinking 30 miles offshore, like if I'd called the Coast Guard, yeah, we would have been swimming by the time they got there. So
Sure.
how am I going to figure this problem out? The first thing is let's calm down and let's reach in our toolbox here and look at the problem and dissect the problem.
Hmm.
You know, I'm
Yeah.
really good at that, but I'm really horrible at that in other situations, which is kind of funny, like dealing with kids and stuff. My wife's like, someone could be like shooting at you and you're fine. The minute, kids spill something, you're like, oh my God. That's so weird.
Amazing, man.
Yeah.
Amazing. There's so much good stuff in there too. And I want to go backward 1 second first, which is to
Yeah.
say that as we're talking about all this stuff about how each of us has the responsibility or at least has the choice to make about whether we want to be responsible to take care of our own training and take care of ourselves. Like you said, it doesn't mean that we go it alone, right? We always have teammates, and
Yeah.
you do the best to train them also and to work with them and to share that both that respect and that sort of joy of serving however you're serving back and forth. I mean, I'm certainly as an ER doctor, I am constantly grateful for the help of my associated teams, like the medicine doctors I work with, the
Right.
cardiologists, the surgeons, the people that really like own their field and own their training, so I can own my field and own mine, and together we can get it done. Um, One of the really cool things that you said about that story is, you're out there with this guy and you're sort of starting to ask, okay, well, listen, man, I know you're panicking right now, but really, what's the worst thing that could happen right now?
Right.
And that discipline of taking this complicated situation and saying, okay, what are we really scared about? We're not even scared, but what is the bad thing here? And let's get ready for that. Let's try to make that happen. You know, in the emergency world, again, we always think, okay, well, maybe we don't exactly know what the situation is. Maybe it's fast moving and it's complicated and this person's very sick. But what I can tell you is that if the worst case scenario happens, if this person's heart stops and they stop breathing and they die, okay, I am absolutely well trained at doing everything humanly possible to get their heart started again. And
Right.
just like you said about I'm going to train my breathing to make sure I can tackle the worst case scenario for the big waves, right? What we do is we train that moment, that resuscitation moment, that code blue sort of situation where the heart stopped. Okay, we're going to drill that and overtrain that and drill that again. A couple months ago, I was teaching our incoming class of interns on their first day of doing simulated training for that exact moment. And we said, okay, you're going to do it. You're going to run it. Okay, now you're going to run it with your eyes closed. Now you're going to run it on one foot. Now you're going to run it facing the other direction because we're going to overtrain you to the point where you feel comfortable in this one moment. And when you have that confidence to be able to handle the worst thing, then you can go backwards and think creatively and flexibly about this other stuff that's happening. I think that's really easy to talk about, harder to do in practice, like everything else we've talked about today.
Right.
But ultimately, it does come back to that inner sense of purpose and self to say, okay, I know I need to do this, so I'm going to go out there and get that training. Um, the other really cool thing that you said, and you've mentioned this 2 or 3 times now, which I think is definitely worth pushing on, is that idea that when you find yourself in that crisis, the answer is never to panic and expend more energy. You only have a set amount of energy, whether you're, trying to fight a current or you're 60, 80 feet under with limited amount of oxygen. And the answer is never panic and consume energy. In fact, it's always the opposite, which is to try to calm down and decrease your energy consumption. Um,
Right. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, we did you know, when I was in the army, we did a lot of combat medicine,
mhm.
which was basically dealing with sunken chest wounds and things like that. And I'll be the first one. I never got a chance to practice it live or anything, but I tried to, train like we fight, as they say. And what I remember was, we had guys in our training. It was like guys were dropping and this and that, and there was all this stuff going on. And I remember kind of just like where all that stuff turned into like white noise. It was like just a blur, and I was just focused on, in the training, doing what I had to do to the patient, like get the gauze on there, split whatever it was. And guys are yelling because they're trying to increase your stress level. Like my team leader, like, Whitman, he's gonna die, blah 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 blah. And it was like none of that even matters, because all I can do is what I know how to do. And if I do 100% of that, then everything else should take care of itself.
Right.
I can only do what I know how to do, and that's it. So why stress out? Like in the moment, you can kind of compartmentalize feelings and then deal with that after the fact, which is where a lot of that PTSD from some of my friends and stuff kind of kicks in. But at that moment, you have to just take your training in whatever discipline it is and apply the training as best as you can. There's really not a reason to freak out. But where the problem is that emotional connection when it's real and it's a friend or, whatever. I'm not trying to pretend to be a doctor at all, but I mean like, and kind of compare anything that I have done to what you guys do every day. But I just know from my little experience where it's like, you really can do, you can only do what you know how to do. Like doing CPR, right? You're trained in CPR. I've had to rescue kids out of pools quite a bit, which is kind of a shame to me. It's unbelievable how that happens so often, especially with pool parties and stuff. I never have a good time at pool parties with kids because I guess having worked on the water for a job, my buddy and I were talking about it. Having been on the water for a job and worked on the water, we have such a healthy respect for water in general where, if I'm at a pool party when the kids were little, I'm in the water with them. Yeah. Because I just have too much. It's just too easy.
That's one of the guests. I think it was episode either 3 or 5. One of my friends, Amy Hildreth, who is a ER doctor and also a lieutenant in the U.S. Navy, said almost verbatim what you just said about how pool parties stress her out, in part because she understands the reality of it, and in part because she's always ready to sort of step in and do what needs to be done.
Yeah, I mean, I remember this one time it was a baseball pool party, and it was an Olympic-sized pool, so it took a little time to get to the kid, and he happened to be right in the middle. They swim out like, I'm gonna go for it. I can make and they get tired. They stick their head up, and they spaz out, kind of. They stress out, and then you start seeing it, and it was obvious. And I actually, I kind of give credit to the dad too, because he just literally pulled up a lounge chair. He wasn't in the pool, and he just sat there staring. Everybody else was doing their thing, and he was just staring at the kids. And he immediately noticed too, and he's like, hey, and I was already in the water, so I was able to get to him in time. But it was a big pool. I mean, he went under quite a bit. But that goes back to like, I know CPR. Okay, what can I do? I can do CPR. There's nothing else. I'm not a paramedic. There's not, unless we got a defibrillator or the heart stops, whatever. There's nothing else I can do except rescue breathing. That's what I can apply. So at that moment, freaking out or anything like that. No, it's literally like, in my mind, it's a dummy and I'm going to work to do this. Right. Later on, that'll be different, I'm sure, when you process it. Like I've done that before where I've gotten home and I've kind of stopped for stuff that has happened at work. And my wife's like, are you all right? I'm like, yeah, I almost died today. I didn't think about it, but like I almost died today, like a couple of diving emergencies and stuff. It's,
No, that's a really important structure that you're saying, which is to figure out in this exact moment, what actually can you affect? Like both what do you have control over and right. all the stuff that you don't, but then also what can you do that makes a difference, right? So right. in maybe my first or second year of residency training, I was working a shift in our acute area at Mass General Hospital, and one of my senior residents was there guiding me through a really complicated case. And if you happen to be listening to this, Griffin Myers, I'm talking about you. You now run Oak Street Health, which is this incredible company, and I've never forgot what you taught me this day. And
Awesome.
he takes me into this room where this patient is really trying hard to die, right? Which is to say that they are very sick, they are getting worse, and if we don't do anything, if we don't act, there's going to be consequences, and that might be death. And I was really stretched to sort of the edge of my abilities. It was pretty early in my training, and I recognized the badness coming, but I couldn't quite figure out what to do. And Griffin was watching me spin up and try to figure it out and sort of start that little bit of panic. And he pulls me over and says, "Okay, remember the things that we can do, right?" So in emergency, we always think about ABC, airway, breathing, circulation, right? I'm sure that you've been through a lot of that as well.
Right.
He goes, "Okay,
Yeah.
so you have this complicated scenario. There's all this stuff going on. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is, you go right back to ABC and you go through it slowly. Okay, how's their airway? You know how to intervene on their airway. You can place a breathing tube. Do they need a breathing tube right now? No. Good. How's their breathing? You can place chest tubes. You can do needle decompressions. You can add oxygen. Do they need those things right now? No. How's their circulation? Well, okay, their blood pressure is pretty low. What are you going to do about that? Here's how you're going to get it done." And that calm, methodical, sort of structured approach that it doesn't ignore the chaos, it accepts the chaos, and it just moves with it. Like what you're saying about the water, right? You don't fight it, you just move with it. I'm very grateful for that lesson, and it's something I've sort of applied in ER continuing. And if any of my current residents are listening to this, I'm sure they've heard me give this talk to them over and over again, which just go to the bedside, just go A, just go B, just go C.
Right.
Don't burn unnecessary energy. Just figure out what you can fix and fix it.
You know, it's interesting. It kind of reminds me of that movie Sherlock Holmes, where he was so intelligent and he just stops and he just breaks everything down so fast. You know what I'm talking about? Where he's like, and it's literally you're doing that at that speed where you're like, okay, situation. These are my options. Choose one of the options. That's the option. And I just feel like, and it doesn't matter if you're practicing medicine or not. It could be avoiding a car accident. Mm-hmm. What are my options? And you think like that, but I think the more you rehearse your mind thinking like that, the better it gets at handling those situations. Mm-hmm. And it, like I said, it doesn't matter if it's medicine or not. Just in general, if you can structure your mind to function like that, when that stress hits, boom, it just goes right down the list of. But you got to have the tools that allow those little menus to pop up with your options. Right. And that's where the training comes in, or the experience, or whatever it is. Like, I've done this before. This doesn't work. Okay,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to go kind of back to what you were saying though too, like
Please.
About team. Like you're only as strong as your weakest link too. So the beauty of having a team is, and it's funny because like this always happens to me sometimes because I'm one of the more experienced guys at my job. All eyes kind of turn to you. Mm-hmm. And then with the team thing that I learned growing up again through sports and stuff, which is like, and my dad was really good at like kind of impressing this upon me, is like, utilize your resources. What is it you're really good at? Okay, cool. If you're going to do that, be the absolute best you can be at that, so that I know I don't have to worry about this at all, and you're on it. And I got to do like my thing as a leader, or as the head doctor or whatever on this unit. This is what I got, and I can trust my people to do everything else. And then those are those pieces that come together to create like this awesome force where everything is just going like clockwork. So it's like on my old job, we had a dive team and we dove every day together, every day, in all these really weird situations, and we would bounce around the globe and do all this stuff. And it was so funny because anytime we got a new guy, like my buddies and I could literally talk to each other underwater just with like, like we all knew exactly. Mm-hmm. Like, and then it got to the point where we didn't even have to, talk. Everybody had a job, and depending on where you ended up at that exact moment, you knew that guy was going to go do this part of that job, and then you were going to go do this part, and then we're all like, it just happens like it's almost like a symphony that gets played, and everybody's just, it's efficiency, it's everything. But everybody's got to have that same mindset of, training. I know what I'm doing. This is what I do. I'm on this team, and I'm going to do it the best of my ability. I just think it's like a mindset thing.
Yeah, and it's again back to that idea of every person has to step up and say, no one's coming, it's up to me. I'm
Right.
responsible for my training. I'm going to overtrain. I'm going to find the weak points and hit them harder and keep going. Um,
Yeah.
and it's
And
it's that.
it can't be like, oh, well, Doc knows kind of about that, so he can help me if I get in,
Mhm.
trouble with this. Well, he might know that, but that may be the case, but you can't think like that. You have to say, I'm going to do this to the best of my ability. I'm going to be this, because if you think like that, that introduces time and it introduces error in communication. And it also takes away from something else that you could be doing or whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's an important distinction because it's not to say that you shouldn't be humble and realistic about your knowledge and your abilities, right? Like if
Right.
when you and I go surfing next time, you are unquestionably going to be the better surfer, and I'm going to look to you for help and advice about how to get out of situations. But
Right.
at the same time, I also have to recognize that like my safety in the water is my own responsibility, right?
Yes.
And I have to
Yeah.
prepare for it and be ready for it. And there's that balance in there of knowing your limits and looking to people that are better than you to learn from them, and also
Right.
understanding that like it's on you to figure out how to make that next step.
And then it takes a little bit of being humble to say, for that learning to occur, to be like, yeah, I could be the best person at doing one aspect of this, but wouldn't um, maybe there's somebody coming up that's better at it, or there was a new thing they discovered or something. There's a new technique, and it's going to take you being humble to say you could be the old crusty old guy that's like, well, I like my way. I do it the best, Or you could be open to the idea and maybe take a little bit of what they're doing and apply it to what you're doing and say, hey, you know what? I like that. That works in this situation, but in this situation, mine works.
Right. And you said it before, sort of at the beginning, like, we learn often through failure. And a lot of
Right.
times that failure is our own failure in one sense or another. And if we're lucky, we have a group of people that we can work with where we can learn from their failures too. We can share these things back and forth and try to get collectively better. It's certainly something that I try to stress with my team is anytime something goes wrong, anytime there's a bad outcome, the last thing we want to do is to let that opportunity go without learning something from it, right? Because that's how we get better for the next
Right.
patient that comes in, the next person that comes in through the door. And I think that's challenging sometimes as you're talking about, being humble and recognizing your own limits to admit, hey, this didn't work. This didn't go the way I
Right.
wanted it to. But even worse than that for me personally is the idea of saying, well, this didn't go the way I wanted it to, and I'm going to not take anything from it. I'm just going to leave it on the table.
Yeah, I'm
That's
going to avoid it. Right.
yeah,
Because it doesn't feel good. Yeah.
exactly. Exactly.
Uh,
Um, well, Brett, I want to be mindful of our time. We've been
yeah.
going for nearly
Right.
an hour here, and this has been awesome. I'm gonna just summarize real quick some of the highlights that I think we've gone through, and then turn it over and see if you have any sort of parting thoughts for folks on the other end of it. But a lot of what we dug into today was talking about sort of around this idea of to perform at your maximum, you have to let go, and trying to think about the maximum level of performance we can reach in whatever our chosen discipline is. We talked about the idea of understanding that it's on us to figure out how to build our own training, and that a lot of what that looks like is thinking ahead, casting our mind ahead, figuring out the worst thing that could happen, both sort of before the event. When we think about the worst thing that can happen, we figure out that weak spot and we train and overtrain right there. And then in the moment when we find ourselves in a pressured situation, to stop, to let go of that panic and the sort of pressure for a second and say, okay, what's the real worst thing that can happen here? What do I have control over? What tools do I have, and what do I need to deploy? And within that is the idea of, whenever possible in the middle of an emergency, decreasing your energy consumption, or rather rationing your energy consumption for sort of what matters the most. But I love that quote to end with, what you said, just to perform at your maximum, you just have to let go. Uh,
Yeah.
so
It's
totally
taken me a
awesome.
long time to learn that
Yeah.
because, you know, um, for various reasons, like growing up and all of that, you want to be in control of everything, right? Like, you wanted to like work out so that you can be strong and manhandle guys or whatever it is, and have control and feel controlled. And I used to train to fight and all this stuff so that I could be able to handle myself in any situation. All of this sort of like control based scenarios. Well, I mean, I guess like, yeah, if you're fighting, it's different it's different in real life scenarios like that where it's not where in its emergency, you
Yeah.
can't control outside variables, right? You can't control if it's, whatever the waves are doing, whatever the current's doing. I cannot control that. So what am I going to do? What am I going to take in from that? And how am I going to use that to either aid me to do this, or just mitigate, limit its impact on what it is I'm trying to do. You know what I'm saying? Like when I
Yeah.
talked about the wind coming up the face, like how can I minimize that impact on me right now? So what do I need to do, the things that I am trained to do in order to overcome those factors?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Bret, man, thank you so much. This was
Yeah.
absolutely awesome talking to you. Tons of great pearls of wisdom for anybody listening to this, ER doctor or not. So thank you so much, man.
I, Thank you for having me. I'm very humbled to be on your show, and especially with some of the amazing people that listen to it, and amazing people you work with, and you yourself. Just keep doing what you're doing. It's so great. Thank you again for having me on your show.
Right on. Thanks a lot, brother.
Hi, brother.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Emergency Mind podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, but more importantly, I hope you found something in there that you can use next time you find yourself in the middle of an emergency. To learn more about what we talked about in this episode and about building your emergency mind in general, head over to our website at emergencymind.com.